What's up, people? DJ Prophecy here, and welcome to the first episode of the DJ Prophecy Show, where we discuss matters and topics related to the DJ field and the DJ community. The topic for today is just various discussions regarding records, particularly hip-hop records, and I just went and found one of my crates and I pulled out 1, 2, 3, 4, looks like five hip-hop records, which I would like to discuss with you guys today. So let's get it started. The first hip-hop record, and these records are going to be LPs, is trying to get the glare out of there, but as you could probably see, it is Doggy Style by Snoop Doggy Dogg. Yeah, so this particular album is very important because when this album came out in, what was it, 1993? Yeah, I believe it was 1993 if I'm not mistaken. This album, this is one of those albums that changed the game, that changed the entire hip hop scene, so to speak. It on a scale from 1 to 10, this album here is a 10. Okay, it's a classic album, and of course it is a West Coast album, but it is so great. It's one of those albums that is so great that it breaks through any barriers that may be there, whether it's West Coast, East Coast, rap. I mean, the album is so phenomenal that I'm sure people that don't even usually listen to rap had the tape or the CD in their car because it was so enormous. The videos from this album were being played on MTV, on BET, on all these music video channels, you know, and everybody was seeing it, and the music was so good. I mean, if I remember correctly, the first single off of this album was "What's My Name," followed by, you know, "Gin and Juice," and for a long time this album was the #1 hip-hop rap album, you know, out there. It was just incredible. Snoop Dogg, this was his first album. He appeared on The Chronic, which we'll get into later, but this was his first album, and it was phenomenal, as I've mentioned. Every song on this album is good. It's more than good. It's incredible. This is one of my favorite rap albums. Okay? Snoop Doggy Dogg, Doggy Style. One of the biggest rap albums of all time. The next album we'll be getting into is The Chronic by Dr. Dre. Now, The Chronic came out before Snoop Doggy Dogg's Doggy Style. Back then he was known as Snoop Doggy Dogg. These days I believe he's going by Snoop Dogg. He shortened it, you know, kind of like Funkmaster Flex is going by Funk Flex these days. if I'm not mistaken, but it's all good, you know. Funk Flex, Snoop Dogg sounds okay to me. I mean, it's just a shortened version of the name. Anyway, back to The Chronic by Dr. Dre. This came out before Doggy Style. I believe it was 1992. Yes. And this was his first project as far as an album is concerned. After he broke away from Ruthless Records, Eazy-E, and NWA, which he was a huge part of prior to moving to Death Row Records and co-founding that label with Suge Knight. Regarding this album, this was another album that totally changed the landscape of hip-hop and rap music. For many reasons. Number one, as many people know, Dr. Dre is an excellent producer. I think everyone could agree with that. And that's part of the reason why the previous album, Doggy Style, was such a success, was because it was produced by Dr. Dre. As a matter of fact, you can see right here on Doggy Style, produced by Dr. Dre, executive producer Suge Knight. In those days, 1992, 1993, Death Row, Snoop Dogg, and Dr. Dre were the center, okay, of the hip hop world, hip hop scene, hip hop, whatever you want to call it. They were at the peak, and they were running things. Okay. Of course, hip hop and rap music started in the East Coast, South Bronx, New York, to be more exact. And for much of the 1980s, it was the East Coast that was basically running the show, until in the late 80s, you know, with the emergence of NWA, and of course its invention of this thing known as gangster rap, which the media has been calling it ever since. You know, what was I saying? Yeah, so gangster rap. Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, they invented this thing known as G-Funk, which puts a gangsta spin on rap music. Now back to what I was saying. The East Coast was running hip-hop and rap since its inception in the late 70s, early 80s, depending on how you look at it. And now here comes the West Coast, California, the city of Compton, the city of Long Beach, LA, and they've taken over the rap scene with Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, the Dog Pound, Lady of Rage, Death Row Records, and previously NWA with of course, Eazy-E, Dr. Dre, DJ Yella, MC Ren, and Ruthless Records, which was the record label. Now back to the Chronic. The Chronic, you could say, almost pulled the leadership, pulled the spotlight away from the East Coast and put it on the West Coast, namely, you know, LA, Compton, Long Beach, what have you. And the West Coast became the dominant hip-hop, rap, you know, scene, you know, center, whatever you may want to refer to it. They became the leaders, in effect, to some extent. The Chronic was the big album in those days, in 1992, with singles like Nothing But a G Thing, and of course later came the big single was Nothing But a G Thing, but there was others such as Dre Day, Let Me Ride. And again, these videos were constantly on MTV. MTV didn't play a lot of rap, especially in those days, with the exception to a few artists, you know, such as Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Naughty by Nature, and other names. They kept rap, for the most part, at bay. They were mostly a heavy metal, rock, alternative, grunge kind of network. But they couldn't deny that rap was a force, you know, a huge force, which was popular, which people wanted to experience, you know, on MTV and on other media outlets. Back to what I was saying about rap on MTV. There was a program known as Yo MTV Raps back in those days, and they played rap and hip hop videos. This was late at night. I mean, you had to stay up. Sometimes it was at 12:30 in the morning, 1:30, 2:30, 3:30. They moved the time around. But if you wanted to catch rap on MTV, for the most part, I mean, those videos, which usually would not air during the daytime, you had to stay up or catch these videos on another network such as BET. Rap City was a program in the afternoon. Basically, kids would come home from school, and you know, if they were into rap and hip hop, they would catch Rap City. They would show a lot of rap videos. Or if you were fortunate enough to have the box, also known as the music, the video jukebox or whatever. I don't really remember the name exactly, but they also showed those videos that wouldn't be played on MTV. MTV was very strict in their guidelines. Even in these videos by artists which they would play all the time on MTV, such as Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre, they would censor them. They would censor logos on clothing, censor stuff they felt was inappropriate, and maybe rightly so, like weapons, guns, marijuana, you know, stuff that would be in the video which they felt they couldn't show, which is understandable. But MTV was very strict when it came to rap. Not to say they weren't strict with other genres such as, you know, heavy metal and stuff. There was some heavy metal stuff they wouldn't play as well. I was never into that type of music. I was you know, really a hip hop head for most of my life, but yeah, MTV was very strict. So back to the Chronic. The Chronic was huge. It was played all over the place. It didn't matter if you were in New York, in California, in Florida, in, you know, the country, you know, people in the Midwest, kids. I mean, everyone was playing the Chronic, and after the Chronic, it was Doggy Style, you know? So with regards to the Chronic, this is a very important album, as I may have said already. And as you could see, the cover art is a takeoff of I don't know how many people out there recognize that, but that is taken from the cover of Zigzag Rolling Papers. But instead of the Zigzag guy with the beard and stuff, they put the DRE, Dr. Dre, in there. Which is quite fitting, since, you know, the name of the album is The Chronic, you know, and it's all about it's pretty much about what you might guess, which is the Chronic. I think it's pretty fitting. Anyway, the Chronic was very influential in hip hop and rap music. Some would say this is where G-Funk was born, out of the Chronic. Some would say it was around to some extent prior to the Chronic album. But yeah, when a lot of people hear G-Funk, this is what comes to mind. Dr. Dre's The Chronic album, and even Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style. Now, a little bit more about the Chronic. You know, Dr. Dre, I think it's fair to call him a rapper, because he has rapped, and he has rap albums and rap records, and he was in, you know, an important rap group, NWA. But he is more than a rapper. He's a producer, he's a visionary, he's I'd say a musician, an artist, a very important figure as far as rap and hip hop history is concerned. I remember when I was in middle school, okay? When this album came out, I was in elementary school. However, later on in middle school, I remember one of my classmates calling Dr. Dre's The Chronic album basically a Snoop Dogg album. And the reason for that was because you mostly hear Snoop Dogg, which was Dr. Dre's protege in those days, and an emerging figure in the world of rap. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that most of the time you do hear other death row artists, whether it's Snoop Dogg, Daz, Corrupt, The Lady of Rage, RBX, Jewel, you know. There's a lot of history behind this album here. There's a great documentary out there. I think you can find it on YouTube. I believe it's called Welcome to Death Row, where they go into the history and the details of the making of the Chronic, and it's really an awesome documentary regarding Death Row Records and the Chronic, and, you know, later on Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, and then it gets into Tupac and everything, and Suge Knight. I definitely recommend that for people who are interested in that. But I'm going to move on at this point. The next album is by the late great Notorious B.I.G. This was his first album. It's Ready to Die. That's the title. I'm sure many have heard of it. And back to what I was saying about Dr. Dre's The Chronic, okay? How it was so influential. What The Chronic was for the West Coast, okay? Ready to Die was for the East Coast. You have to understand that hip-hop, the West Coast was running hip-hop in many ways. They were where the attention was because the music coming out of there was so great and the artists were so great. Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, before them NWA, you know. And then there were other artists, you know, Cypress Hill, Compton's Most Wanted, MC8, Spice One. This whole, I mean, rap and hip hop had turned gangsta. You have to understand this. Before NWA, before California, before Death Row Records, rap and hip hop was not gangsta. I mean, there was small elements of gangsta here and there, maybe in the music of Boogie Down Productions or, you know, various rap acts. But it wasn't to the extent that when NWA burst on the scene from the West Coast, and it really flipped rap and hip hop at that point, because many, if not most, of the artists and groups coming out after NWA and Death Row Records had a very hard, aggressive, gangsta, street feel to them and vibe. You know, Wu-Tang Clan, Notorious B.I.G., you know, even Tupac, you know, across the board. Many artists and groups within the genre had to be hard, had to be street, had to be gangsta, had to talk about guns and, you know, I'll shoot your brain out and my clique will, you know, kill your gang and all this and that, you know what I'm saying? And to some it was negative, but at the same time it elevated the art form, and as long as it's on wax, as long as it's just in the music, it's fine. I mean, it's freedom of speech, and they don't talk about stuff that you don't see in films, you know, by Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood is extremely violent, and they use graphic language, you know, and things of that nature. So it would be hypocritical to say that, you know, records must be clean and G-rated and this and that, where Hollywood has R-rated films which are just as graphic and violent and adult orientated, you know. So that's why many rap albums that are intended more towards the adult audience have this parental advisory sticker, which lets the consumer know that it contains explicit lyrics and mature content. But back to Ready to Die by the Notorious B.I.G., also known as the Notorious Big, Biggie Smalls. Okay, so in those days, 1992, 1993, even 94, that time period, the West Coast was dominating the hip-hop and rap scene, okay? Along comes some New York MCs, New York rappers, such as Nas, such as Fat Joe, such as Gangstar. You know, Gangstar's been around, but they played a role in the take back, so to speak, of rap and hip hop from the West Coast dominance. Okay, but more importantly, it was the Notorious Big. He really played a huge role in bringing rap and hip hop back to the East Coast. And to understand how influential Dr. Dre's The Chronic was in the world of rap and hip hop, you could actually hear a sample of Dr. Dre's The Chronic on one of the tracks on this album. I believe the track is it's either Things Done Changed or Machine Gun Funk. It's one of those, but you could hear, you could hear a sample or a scratch of a verse or something from Dr. Dre's The Chronic album in there. It was so influential. Again, the West Coast had The Chronic, which everybody loved. I don't know anybody East West who didn't love The Chronic and appreciate The Chronic for what it was. It was a masterpiece. And along comes the East Coast version of that, which is Ready to Die by the Notorious Big. Okay, this was the East Coast version of The Chronic. This, my friends, is a masterpiece album. Make no mistake about it. This was the answer to The Chronic. This brought hip hop and rap back to the East Coast. I mean, I lived through that time, and it was incredible. Can you imagine the West Coast is running rap, and then all of a sudden, New York reemerges as the dominant owners of rap and hip hop, the house of hip hop, so to speak, the Mecca of hip hop. Okay, that is what this album did. It brought it back to the East Coast. It was in large part due to the Notorious Big, but it was other MCs, other albums out there, such as Nas's Illmatic, Gangstar's album, the one with Mass Appeal on it. I forgot the title, but Mass Appeal, which is a single from Gangstar. Jeru the Damager, and a bunch of other MCs, Fat Joe. The East Coast was back. They reclaimed the spot, so to speak. Of course, later on, this created a lot of friction between the East and West Coasts, and some would say it wasn't really between the two coasts, rather it was between two people, two record companies, two record executives, you know, Puffy and Suge Knight. But that's a whole nother discussion. But that was in many respects the beginning of the tensions regarding the East and West Coast rivalry. But that, as I mentioned, is a totally another discussion, which we may get into in the future. But yeah, Ready to Die by the Notorious B.I.G., another classic album um, in the history of rap and hip hop music. We're going to move on to another album right now. And this album is, it was written by Nas. Okay, all of the records that I'm mentioning today, especially the first four, are very dear to me because as I was growing up, these records, these albums, I listened to them a lot. So did my friends, you know, the people I was hanging out with. These were huge, huge records. Now, regarding Nas's It Was Written, I must say, personally speaking, this is my favorite Nas album of all time. Some people may say their favorite is Illmatic, which was Nas's first album. But for me, It Was Written was his best album. I understand why some people feel Illmatic was better. I mean, that's their personal opinion. My personal opinion is that this is his greatest work. But it doesn't mean Illmatic was not a good album or it was not important or significant. It played a huge role in, as I mentioned before, bringing back the East Coast to the scene. However, and I do like Illmatic. I like it a lot. I don't frown upon it. I do give it a thumbs up. But back to It Was Written, Nas's second album, I feel not only was it a better album than Illmatic, but my personal feelings about this album here is that besides it being an absolute masterpiece, the quality, okay, the first four records, as a matter of fact, all of the records that I'm mentioning here today during this show, they're all high quality albums. They're all great. They're all, you know, a 10, at least a 9. As far as a scale from 1 to 10 is concerned, I mean, they're the top. Make no mistake. They are, you know, 10 out of 10, basically. Okay, let's not get it twisted. The way I see Nas's It Was Written, personally, I don't know how others view it, but to me, the work, the entire album, there was not one bad song on there. Okay? Or to be totally, to keep it 100, maybe there was just one song that wasn't too hot, but the rest were incredible, you know. As is the case with Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style and Dr. Dre's The Chronic and Ready to Die by Biggie. But the point I'm trying to make here is that, in my opinion, It Was Written at the time when it came out. It came out at a time where Ready to Die by Biggie had already dropped. It had huge success, and the East Coast was back at this point. You know, they were back on the scene. They were, you could even say they were running the game at this point again, after you know, reclaiming you know, rap from the West, so to speak. So if I'm not mistaken, this album came out in 1996, okay? And all my friends were bumping it. Everybody was bumping it. It was a huge seller. But as far as the album itself was concerned, I always viewed it as so much superior and so way ahead of its time. It was like Leonardo da Vinci during the time that he was living. If anybody out there knows who Leonardo da Vinci was, he did a lot of things. He was an artist, an engineer, a whole bunch of things at a time where things weren't really moving like that. I mean, his mind, his craft, the stuff that he was doing was so way ahead of his time. And that's the way I view this album. It was such a work of art. What comes to mind besides Leonardo da Vinci is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but the Sistine Chapel, which is in Italy. If you've ever seen that, it's on the ceiling in one of those places over there, historical, tourist destinations, Catholic holy places in Italy, in the Vatican, if I'm not mistaken. That's how I see it was written by Nas, as a masterpiece, work of art, so way ahead of its time. Another comparison I'd like to make regarding that album is, for those of you out there who believe in aliens, extraterrestrials, and how their technology is way more advanced than our earthly technology, and that their minds are so far more advanced than our human brains. When this album came out and I heard it, that's the way I saw it. Like this is so advanced. I mean, the tracks, the beats, even Nas's lyricism, the way he puts it down, the way he laces his vocals over the tracks, it just fits so perfectly. And I don't think anybody was making an album like this prior to it was written, and even after it was written. I mean, there were similar albums, similar music, and they were very good, such as stuff by Wu-Tang artists and affiliated artists such as Killah Priest. Heavy Mental being a good example, an album I absolutely love, one of my favorite rap albums of all time by Killah Priest, Heavy Mental. Make sure you check that album out. It's absolutely incredible, as are these albums I'm discussing with you here today. But back to it was written by Nas. To me, it was so futuristic, it was so artistic, it was so unique, it was so incredible. I mean, to this day, it's one of my favorite albums. The production, let's speak about the production for a minute. The production, if I'm not mistaken, was by, well, it says right here, executive producers, Nas, Steve Stout, and track masters, which of course is Token Pone. They are a production duo. Track masters, producers, they whatever they touch, the track masters, I mean, it turns into diamond. They're so great, the track masters. And this album is a prime example. of how great the Trackmasters production duo are. But not only them, there's a track on this Nas album which is done by none other than Dr. Dre. The name of the track is Nas Is Coming. If I'm not mistaken, he produced that track, okay? And it's an awesome track. I mean, you just got to hear it to experience it. I'm trying to imagine it in my brain. I've heard it a million times. But yes, it was written by Nas. One of my favorite rap albums of all time. Incredible work of art. Way ahead of its time. In my opinion, Nas's best work. And highly recommended. The next album on the list is Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood by the great DMX. You see, as a DJ, you know, I had to go out there and get as much music as I could get my hands on, especially on vinyl. You know, especially, you know, back in the days. I'm an old school DJ, and I to this day I use vinyl. You know, but back in the days, you know, I either had to go find records to buy them, either at stores, record stores here and there, there were not many back when I got into DJing, which was back in 1998. So at that time, CDs were the main format. And then when I got into DJing in 1998, I started, you know, as other DJs, I would go find vinyl, which was at record stores. You couldn't go to the mall. You know, in those days they had Sam Goody's, they had Specs, they had stores in the mall which sold music, but that was on CDs and cassettes. They didn't sell vinyl in those days in the mainstream. The main formats again were CDs and to a lesser extent cassettes. Cassettes were dying out. Vinyl was not dead, and it's not even dead today. I don't think vinyl will ever die. It's too great of a format to ever go away. But vinyl in those days, you know, 1998, two main groups of people used vinyl records. One were the audiophiles, which grew up on vinyl and that was their favorite format. Okay. The second group of people were DJs, disc jockeys, you know. So yeah, and if you were a DJ, vinyl was not easy to come by. You had to find record stores, and there were not many of them. There were, you know, one or two here and there that carried vinyl, and you would go in there and you would spend time in there, dig in the crates. You know, I'm sure people have heard that term, and find the music you're looking for. And so that was one way which I would get music on vinyl. Another way was you would, as a DJ, you would join what was known in those days as a record pool. A record pool was a place DJs would go to. They would pay a monthly fee, whatever it was, $30, $20, $50, $60, $80, whatever the fee was. And record labels would send their new releases or whatever records, you know, they were trying to promote to these record labels, and that's where DJs would get some of their music from. It was a more economical way of acquiring music for DJs. And the first 4 albums, you know, that I discussed with you, I actually purchased these. These were among the albums that I actually purchased at record stores, okay? This one here, this DMX album, I got this album at a record label which I was a member of in the late 90s in North Miami in Florida. And I got a lot of great records from the record pool. This was one of them. So back to this DMX album here. This is a very high quality piece of work here by DMX. Just look at the artwork. You can see he's covered in some kind of mess, some kind of goo. It resembles blood. And if you love rap, if you love hip hop, this is one of the albums you're truly gonna enjoy, I believe, especially if you're into East Coast hip hop. Jay-Z, The Lox, they make appearances on this album. Of course, The Lox were part of the Rough Riders, which was DMX's crew. And it's just a great album. I mean, I don't know how much I could go into details, but this is one of the albums I truly recommend. And I had the pleasure of seeing DMX live in concert. I had great seats. This was at the Hard Knock Life tour, which came to Miami in the late 90s. I believe it was 1998 or 1999, the Hard Knock Life tour, which was the biggest rap hip-hop concert up until that point, if I'm not mistaken. It had groups and artists such as DMX, Rough Riders, Jay-Z, Eve, Method Man, Redman were some of the names. And then if I remember correctly, groups and artists would sometimes show up who are not actually, you know, billed as part of the concert. So if I'm not mistaken, you know, guys like, you know, Busta Rhymes would suddenly show up or something, you know. If I remember correctly, I've been to a few, you know, a bunch of rap concerts. I may be getting this confused with another huge concert I attended. But yeah, the Hard Knock Life tour, which DMX was a part of, DMX gave an incredible performance, unbelievable. I mean, I had fantastic seats, and I didn't pay for those seats. It's this is, you know, this could be a separate video which we could get into at a future time. But I didn't pay for those seats. I had front row, the best seats in the house, and I saw the entire show. And if I did pay for those seats, I believe the money was well worth it. The Hard Knock Life tour concert, unbelievable concert. It was worth every penny. It was worth every second. It was worth all of the hype. All of the artists were incredible. It was just an incredible, incredible concert. And if I'm not mistaken, there is a documentary on the Hard Knock Life tour. It may be on YouTube for free. I believe it's called Backstage, something like that. But it does cover the Hard Knock Life tour. So that's it for this episode, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this this first show, and I hope you will return for the next one. This is DJ Prophecy. Peace.